Hello, hello, hello. This is Dr. Janice R. Love, also known as the First Lady Coach, and I equip seasoned pastors' wives to have the clarity, the confidence, and the courage to walk boldly into the destiny for which she was chosen by being perfectly who God created her to be. Welcome to session number 9 of my Pearl Power Holiday Series. I second that emotion. Let's go. And you can find me at my website, which is janicerlove.com. So last night, oh gosh, we had a good conversation on last night from violated to virtuous. And we talked about Bathsheba. And if you didn't get to see that, please go back and see that. All right, but let's go ahead and get started for tonight. Again, we've been focusing on emotions, which are very instinctive. They're natural and they are a result of our consequences, our mood, and even our relationships. So, again, we have been in the series, I Second That Emotion, How to Manage Your Emotions the Healthy Way, God's Way. And tonight, we are going to be talking about from invisible to inspirational. Now, working with pastors' wives for the last really 6 years or so, I often hear many will mention that for some reason, because we're in the environment that we are in, and our husbands are so powerful, our husbands have such an important job, so many people depend on them, and they are at the forefront of everything. Really, everything revolves around them. And whether your husband is a pastor or a minister, or even an influencer of some type, if they are in an important role, the world kind of revolves around them. Can I second that? Okay. And oftentimes what happens is trying to walk beside them, we oftentimes may feel smaller. I hear women say sometimes that they feel like they're shrinking, but I also hear oftentimes that they feel invisible. So we're going to be talking about what invisible is and what it feels like. And then what we're going to do is help you to move from invisible to inspirational, just like this lady in our Bible, in the Bible did. All right, so let's go ahead and define invisible. Let's start there. Invisible, concealed from sight, hidden, ignored, or not taken into consideration. Now, think about that from a standpoint of us being as pastors' wives, or again, being married to an influencer. So many times you can feel invisible, ignored, like you're not even there, right? Have anybody ever walked by you to get to your husband and just didn't act like they didn't even see you, right? Oftentimes our gifts and talents are ignored. We aren't able to use them in the setting. Again, it means that we have been concealed from sight, hidden, ignored, or not taken into consideration. And then there are in some denominations, women are not able to be in leadership positions, and often again hidden. You are to be seen but not heard. Kind of like sometimes what we say about children, right? So again, that causes women to feel invisible. But we are going to be moving from invisible to inspirational, which means that you are providing or showing creative or spiritual inspiration. Now, who wants to go from invisible to inspirational? All right, so think about again some of the things that we experience in our lifetime causing us to feel like we are invisible. Now, if you look at the emotional wheel, invisible, feeling like you're invisible could fall in a number of categories. One could mean sadness, one could be fear, but it can, based on how invisible you feel, it can fulfill the full range. Okay. So, as we talk about the different emotions that we experience, if you are experiencing that you are feeling invisible, you maybe are struggling with low self-esteem, or you're having some confidence challenges. Maybe you're complaining that nobody pays any attention to you, or that you are invisible. Maybe you feel insignificant, or you are emotionally exhausted because, again, you feel like you are doing what you do in vain. You might feel inferior. You just might shut down because you say nobody pays attention to me anyway. Again, confidence can struggle. You maybe become not assertive, that you kind of lay back and will not assert yourself to do things. Could be some anger, could be some shame there as well, could be some sadness, and we could feel unworthy. All right. Now, let me tell you how people end up sometimes feeling invisible. When you think about from a racial perspective, oftentimes African Americans, we as African Americans, sometimes will say that we feel invisible. So that comes from stereotypes. Okay, so in our culture and in the world in which we exist with our husband, sometimes again we could be stereotyped a certain way. You ever had anybody say to you, "You don't seem like a pastor's wife"? It's because in their mind, they have stereotyped you to be a certain kind of way. And again, this could come from a variety of sources. But again, when we are often stereotyped, that can lead to people treating us in such a way that we feel invisible. Can anybody second that emotion? Where's my little thing out there that says, "Can you second that emotion?" I can't even find it. But anyway, can you second that emotion of feeling invisible from time to time? All right. So we've already talked about the kind of behaviors that we will exhibit when we feel invisible. And again, I'm asking you, can you second that emotion of sometimes feeling invisible, like you are just plain hidden from sight, that nobody even knows you're there? Or we have that feeling that people do not appreciate us for who we are and for what God has created us to do. All right. So let's talk about someone who was in the Bible who felt like, who was somewhat invisible. Have you ever heard of Priscilla in the Bible? She's often heard of with her husband. If you see Priscilla, you're going to see Aquila, and you can actually find them in the book of Acts. But anytime you see her name, you are going to see his name as well. And they were a team. So let me tell you what her circumstances were. The first circumstance was that she was a woman in a male-dominated culture. Her husband was a tent maker, as well as he was in the ministry. And so she was with him. They were together and they worked together. And she was a woman in a male-dominated culture because women were not allowed. Think about it, back in the even in the New Testament, until Jesus kind of redeemed us, right? Women still did not necessarily have a voice or an identity, especially when it came to speaking up in churches or teaching or mentoring in churches. Okay, so here's Priscilla, and she is in a male-dominated culture, right? So she's also married to a leader. And again, she is never mentioned by herself. And as we go along to talk about how she moved to Inspirational, you'll see that she stood in her own right, but she was never mentioned by herself. Again, she was part of this team. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But again, when you feel invisible and you are only, has anybody ever, I'll put it this way. Do you have an identity by yourself without someone putting your identity with your husband? So many times, again, we oftentimes struggle with our identity because it is so connected to our husbands. Can I get, can somebody second that emotion? Okay. And then her other circumstance was that she had gifts. She had the gift of teaching and mentoring. But again, being in a male-dominated environment, she wasn't often able to really step forward and use that. All right. So let's talk about how she went from invisible. Again, she was there, but again, because she always had to, in a sense, maybe walk behind her husband. We don't know that. But again, she was never mentioned herself. But what we'll learn is that she had a gift. She had gifts in her own right. All right. So what does she do to go from invisible to inspirational? The very first thing that she does is that she knew who God created her to be. Now, Priscilla, she knew exactly what her gifts and talents were. She knew she could teach. She knew that she could speak. She knew that she could write. And she knew exactly who God created her to be. She looked at her life and how her and her husband had come together, the things that they had gone through together, the people that they had met. And she knew exactly what God created her to do. So many times, again, when we are walking this journey, if we haven't taken the time and actually use the resources to find out who God created us to be, then again, we will be out there not with our own identity. All right. So the very first thing she did was that she knew who God created her to be. So secondly, guess what she did? She walked beside her husband. Now, you all have heard me say this before, that oftentimes that we do not necessarily walk behind our husbands. We walk beside our husbands, which means we are a team. Now, I am not saying that means that you have to be a team, as in that you are he's the pastor, you the co-pastor, that kind of thing. But you are a team, meaning that you are doing life together and you are doing ministry together, in that you are serving others. Okay, so they're a team. They're tent makers together. They're also working together in ministry. Okay. Again, where one is mentioned, so is the other. But at the same time, as she is using her own gifts and skills, guess what? She is not a distraction to her husband's ministry. So many times we're afraid to step out and do what God has created us to do, because sometimes we may feel that they may be a distraction to what our husband has been called to do. But she did this without being a distraction. Then guess what? She was more than a helpmate. She wasn't just cooking, cleaning, doing that kind of stuff. She was more than a helpmate, because she was able to stand beside him, to do some incredible things, especially when it came to mentoring people. All right, so how you like that? She actually walked beside her husband. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Thirdly, she used her gifts to teach and mentor. Again, she knew exactly who she was. So she used her gifts that God had given her to teach and to mentor. Now, what I call this is that she is actually standing on her own platform. Even though she is doing it with her husband, she has special gifts. Now, we know that she was a huge encouragement to Paul, right? We know that he stayed with them, so she had hospitality. She mentored him. They mentored him, right? But there's a lot of stories out there that say, because her name is mentioned first 5 times out of 7 times, that means there was a special connection between her and Paul. Okay. Now, again, I'm not trying to start any arguments, but if you look in the Bible, you'll see that the 7 times they are mentioned together, that 5 of those times she is mentioned before. So, you know what? God did that for her. All right. She also, they are known to have instructed and corrected Apollos. And again, think about the risk she took doing that, because women couldn't teach men, right? But she was right there mentoring and using the skills, gifts, and abilities that God had given her to make a difference in somebody else's life. She mentored. Okay. Now, she was committed to teaching about Jesus, and in such a way that this is what God did for her, for moving her from invisible to inspirational. Now, there are Bible scholars who have written in several locations that the book of Hebrews could have actually been written by either Paul, Apollos, or it could have been written by Priscilla. Now, imagine that, if she is the author of Hebrews. Now, I'm not going to argue with anybody about whether or not they think that she is or not, or the argument you want to have about that. But the fact that it is believed that she could be the author, that tells me she was standing on her own platform. And we can do the very same thing. So again, the things that we have to do in order to move from invisible to inspirational And and this is something I have been doing with pastors' wives for, again, several years. But let me tell you how I am doing that and how women are moving from being invisible to inspirational. And it's done through my Chosen Pearls program. And again, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of deal about my Chosen Pearls program, but it is a mentoring and coaching program specifically for women who are married to ministry or women who are married to influencers that helps you again to move from invisible to inspirational. So let me tell you some of the modules that are included in this Chosen Pearl program. First of all, to help you to understand exactly who you are and who God created you to be, Module 1 consists of created, called, and chosen. Now, there are some instruments and some tools that I have that will help you to discover exactly who God created you to be, what your temperament is, the skills, gifts, and abilities, the values, and the things that He has placed in you to prepare you for the journey ahead. Then next we have more than a helpmate. Again, we talked about Priscilla, the fact that she was more than a helpmate. Module 2 consists of helping you to take a look at your life in 5 different areas to see whether or not you are having that harmonious life and walking beside your husband that we so desire. Everybody wants a fulfilling and harmonious life and marriage. And this module helps you to do just that. And again, it helps you to have that harmony that we so desire in our lives. Then the third module is emerge out of the shadows. Now, when we think about being in the shadows, we have a certain belief that perhaps we don't have that confidence that we need to believe that God has created, called, and chosen us for something, and that He has decided this before we were ever born. So when we are able to get rid of all of those things that Satan can plant in our minds and all those beliefs that we are not good enough, then we can begin to emerge out of the shadows. And then next, we can stand firm on our own platform. So again, you saw exactly what happened with Priscilla because she knew what her gifts, talents, and abilities were, and she knew exactly what God created her to do. She was able to stand firm on her platform and not be afraid when she was actually working and teaching men, which was not allowed in her day and time. But when we have that confidence that God has given us certain gifts and abilities, then we can stand firm on that platform that He created us to fulfill. My favorite is going from transforming from Eve to Esther, which is module number 5. And that helps you to learn how to make decisions and look at the character traits and the things that you need to not make the similar mistakes that Eve made, but to be able to recognize that you were created for such a time as this and walk into your destiny. Then finally, we have talked about the fact that we often don't have a safe place. So module number 6 is nurture, network, and connect, where you are able to nurture the gifts that God has given you. You're able to network and connect with other like-minded women who are able to help you along your journey. And guess what? I'll be right there by your side to do it. So Chosen Pearls, I will be launching a brand new Chosen Pearls group the 6th of February. And I would love to share more information with you about it. So I invite you to visit my website, which is janicerlove.com. And I want you to click on Chosen Pearls. And then I want you just to watch a short video so you can learn more about how you can move from invisible to inspirational. Also, you can walk boldly into that destiny for which you have been chosen by being perfectly who God created, called, and chose you to be. So hopefully you will take a look at that, and I look forward to having a private conversation with you. Now, there is a limit on the amount of time that I will I will be taking conversations. And again, I am limiting this to no more than 10 women who want to be part of this. So you can, again, move from invisible to inspirational and all those other things that we have talked about throughout the week, how you can move from one emotion, which could be wreaking havoc on your spiritual, emotional, and physical journey, and you can move to joy and happiness. And that's where you can second that emotion. All right. Any questions out there for me? That is how, again, you can second that emotion. Any questions for me out there? How's everyone?